Madagascar is an island off the coast of Africa, and it's beautiful. The island, a little larger than California, or about twice the size of Britain, was settled by humans relatively recently, most likely around the year 400 AD. The initial settlement of Madagascar involved a somewhat unusual blend of populations. The majority ethnic group today, the Malagasy, has a dual heritage, approximately half from the Bantu people of mainland Africa and half from Austronesians originating around the Pacific region. This mixed origin is supported by genetic studies indicating ancestry from both East Africa and Borneo, and is reflected in the Malagasy language, which combines Austronesian and Bantu linguistic elements. For most of the island's early history, population was low and very spread out, with power split between various small kingdoms that would occasionally clash with each other. Most people were either farmers, herders, or fishers, with almost no urbanization happening. Things went along like this until the 1800s, when European powers showed up. As part of their rivalry to control the Indian Ocean, France and Britain took particular interest in Madagascar. Through a series of less-than-scrupulous deals with various powerful locals, France was able to gain significant influence. By the late 1800s, France had undermined the island's institutions so thoroughly that it was impossible for anyone on Madagascar to raise a military. So, in 1895, France formally took over the island after a brief military campaign, seizing Antananarivo, the de facto capital. The period of French rule was marked by harsh and exploitative policies designed to extract as much wealth from Madagascar as possible. High-intensity insurgencies also quickly sprung up. With few towns and large amounts of wilderness, France wasn't able to actually control much of the island. Both freedom fighters and bandits were able to attack French forces with impunity, making Madagascar extremely unappealing for potential settlers. With an order from Paris for colonial administrators to do more with less, the island saw little development outside of a few projects built using forced labor. France did bring one thing, however: foreign ideologies. It was around the 1930s that resistance to colonialism became more organized, with political parties and newspapers being set up. Aside from a brief British occupation during World War II, things were relatively uneventful until the late 50s. As part of the decolonization process, France held referendums in each of its African colonies in September 1958. The question on the ballot was if the colonies wished to become autonomous states within a new French community, or if they wanted full independence immediately. The two major parties that had formed by this point, and the French government, set to work on influencing the public's vote. Charles de Gaulle visited Madagascar, giving a speech promising autonomy and prosperity if the people voted to stay with France. The largest party in the country, the Social Democratic Party, or PSD, also spoke in favor of keeping close ties with France. Opposition came from the Congress Party for the Independence of Madagascar, or AKFM, a Marxist party that demanded complete independence immediately. The referendums ultimately went decisively in France's favor, with Guinea being the only colony opting for independence. In Madagascar, 77% of voters chose to join the new French community as an autonomous state. France repealed their own 1896 law that annexed Madagascar in response, and the island was allowed to form a proper national legislature. This new Constituent National Assembly elected Philibert Tsiranana, the leader of the PSD, as the country's interim president shortly after. It was a strange independence, however. Tsiranana especially was an awkward choice, as he was deeply involved in French politics, even serving as a member of France's UN delegation in 1959. The idea that someone with possibly split interests and ties to a former colonial overlord would now be presiding over such important things as the new nation's constitution stirred some concerns and suspicions. This apprehension would influence the country's first free municipal elections in 1959. While the PSD did ultimately win the elections, they lost many key seats in cities, particularly the capital, Antananarivo. The AKFM, while nominally Marxist and indeed having many communists in its ranks, functioned more like a nationalist party in practice. Led by Reverend Richard Andria Manjatu, the party was able to unite both Christians and many left-leaning individuals to form a competent opposition. Madagascar gained full independence in 1960, but the PSD government maintained very close ties with France. The country's foreign reserves were all being kept in France, and Tsiranana chose to hire French people to run many local governments and government bodies. His party also began attempting to neutralize the opposition, frequently creating offices of delegates general to supersede the authorities of mayors who weren't PSD members. The opposition accused him of running a neo-colonial regime and not delivering any sort of real change or true independence. Things weren't helped by Tsiranana giving an interview to French newspaper Le Monde, stating, "We allow the opposition to exist, but not to act." Not a good look for someone supposedly building a democratic state. Discontent and increasingly harsh ways of suppressing it would continue through the 60s. PSD party members were given the authority to have anyone they suspected of wrongdoing arrested by the police. Tsiranana tried implementing extremely unpopular policies, such as an attempt to establish diplomatic relations with South Africa at the height of apartheid in 1967. The PSD still managed to win elections, but it is generally believed these were rigged to present the image of a strong, unified party in the face of its growing internal divisions. Tsiranana seems to have gotten it in his head that if he could look popular, then he would actually be popular, which he was not. The average citizen hadn't seen much, if any, improvements to the economy, with the harsh French-style tax system still being in place and very little development happening. Aside from a small handful of new factories, a trade deal selling cloves to Indonesia, and cornering the world's vanilla supply, the PSD government didn't have much they could brag about on the financial side of things. In 1971, Tsiranana faced health issues that created a temporary power vacuum which others in his party attempted to exploit. His interior minister was arrested on charges of plotting a coup with American and Chinese support. Amidst this political chaos, farmers in the South organized large protests over the government's failure to improve the economy. The PSD responded with a harsh crackdown, resulting in the deaths of at least 2,000 people. As you would expect, this did not end the protests, and only fanned the flames. By 1972, strikes and protests were occurring nationwide, now organized by opposition parties. Some of the most influential were the ones by the AKFM's youth wing in the capital. The government kept trying to use force to suppress the unrest, which only made more people, especially church leaders, join the protests. Tsiranana gave up a few months in, resigning on May 18, 1972, and transferring power to his Army Chief of Staff, Gabriel Ramanatsoa, to form a transitional government. On the ground, protesters had been organizing into local committees and councils modeled off structures from the Russian Revolution. Many were hoping to organize these into a formal government structure. Ramanatsoa, however, had other plans. A referendum was held to rewrite the constitution and give the military the authority to run a transitional government for 5 years, a measure that passed with 96% of the vote. Parliament was abolished and replaced by a consultative body only, staffed primarily by technocrats. Ramanatsoa brought many of his allies into the government, including Albert Zafy and Didier Ratsiraka. Ratsiraka was appointed as foreign minister and began cutting the country's ties with France, as had been decided during the referendum. French-owned companies were seized and nationalized, and Madagascar's currency left the franc zone. While these were popular, it did little to calm the unrest on the streets. The transitional government would only last 28 months, collapsing in February 1975 when power was transferred to the interior minister. He would be assassinated just 5 days into his term, however. He was shot by former presidential guards from the PSD era while driving home, in circumstances that are still unclear. This almost resulted in a civil war, but an 18-person council made up of high-ranking military officers took control of the country before things got too crazy. Amongst this council, former foreign minister and naval captain Didier Ratsiraka eventually emerged as the de facto leader. In December 1975, yet another referendum was held, this time to implement Ratsiraka's Charter of the Socialist Revolution, otherwise known as the Red Book. Along with a measure to elect Ratsiraka as the leader of the new Democratic Republic of Madagascar, it also passed with 96% of the vote. The Red Book was deliberately vague in almost all aspects, and served primarily to give a Marxist and populist veneer to what was essentially a military coup. policy goals were written so broadly, saying something was or wasn't revolutionary would be difficult. The document contains few measurable objectives as well. Plenty of words, not a lot of numbers. Ratsiraka quickly began consolidating his power, with many of his fellow military members who had comprised the transitional government either being arrested or dying in mysterious accidents. All political parties were required to join the National Front for the Defense of the Revolution. This was a coalition led by Ratsiraka's own party, Arima, or the Malagasy Revolutionary Party. The revolutionary rhetoric at home would be coupled with a realignment abroad. The PSD government had often railed against the Soviet Union, but this new government openly embraced the Soviet bloc and North Korea. All French military bases on Madagascar were shut down, cutting some of the last physical ties with France. Ratsiraka, despite being the former foreign minister, was a little out of his depth sometimes though. One of his first actions in office was formally protesting Indonesia's invasion of East Timor. Indonesia's response was pretty much telling them to shut up about it or they'd cancel the extremely lucrative cloves deal. Madagascar's economy would see little benefit from this change in foreign policy. Around 60% of the economy was nationalized, which sharply increased public debt and led to widespread corruption, even allegedly involving Ratsiraka's own family. Some foreign investment did arrive, but much of it went towards useless projects, such as a flour mill built in the province that produced zero wheat and never made any flour. The government also promised a huge boost on the economy whenever they would be able to finally exploit the large Bemolanga oil field in the west of the country. The date for when oil would actually be extracted kept getting pushed back, even getting a song by the pop group Mahaleo about the situation. Farmers, often portrayed in official state messaging as the backbone of the revolution, the epitome of the upstanding worker, were greatly harmed by many government policies. The state took over all crop marketing and distribution services in the country, a system that very quickly collapsed. Farmers were forced to settle for selling their crops to the immediate local area or participate in the informal economy, which exploded in activity. For most people, buying everyday goods on the black market was the only way to survive. All of this, and the goal of completely severing ties with France, wasn't even achieved. France was still the country's biggest trade partner and contributor of foreign aid, often even being the country stepping in to finance the government's state-run enterprises. Aid from the Soviet bloc made up less than 1% of total aid received from 1977 to 1980. Ratsiraka, while distrustful of France, often kept the Soviet Union at a distance. While he visited Moscow and met with Brezhnev, he was reluctant to let the Soviets get involved beyond some limited financial and military aid. Soviet requests for a naval base in Diego Suarez were repeatedly refused, though this is perhaps because he was afraid of losing French aid. French mercenary activity in the nearby island nation of Comoros may have also dissuaded Ratsiraka from making too many big foreign moves. However, cutting ties with France was not entirely unsuccessful. Culturally, it significantly contributed to building an independent identity and national culture. Prior to, and even after independence, indigenous culture was often disregarded in favor of foreign ones. Music, for example, moved away from attempting to copy European and American styles and started using traditional Malagasy music as inspiration. Some cultural policies occasionally sparked serious conflict. Christian organizations, and especially Christian private schools, were targeted as harmful sources of foreign influence. In 1978, the government attempted to nationalize these schools, leading to widespread opposition from every major Christian group in the country. While the issue didn't escalate far, the Christian Party, the FFKM, brought into the government by Ratsiraka himself, would be a consistent thorn in his side. Education was a major issue in the country generally, and one of the main sparks for the 1972 protests that brought the military government to power originally. Education before had been based on the French colonial model, where access was strictly split along class lines. Thousands of students were also being sent abroad each year to study in France. Under Ratsiraka, education was made much more universally accessible, and students would be sent to the Soviet Union instead. As part of this shunning of foreign cultures, however, non-Malagasy groups would get the blame for the country's issues. For example, in 1977, Ratsiraka alleged there was a coup attempt against him orchestrated by South Africa. The local Indian and Comoran communities were the scapegoats for this, and many were persecuted and deported as a result. Probably the strangest consequence of the cultural realignment was the government's clashes with kung fu clubs. In the late 70s and early 80s, kung fu became fairly popular in Madagascar, especially amongst the urban middle and upper classes. Young people from these clubs would sometimes get into fights with government militias, causing disturbances in cities. After getting reports that everyone was kung fu fighting, the central government literally called in the army to go to gyms and break up any kung fu clubs they found. This is the greatest sentence from any book ever. Madagascar began to liberalize its economy comparatively early in 1980. At least under the PSD government, the economy did grow slightly. Under Ratsiraka, however, the economy shrunk significantly. The amount of people in poverty went from 2 in 4 to 3 in 4 under his leadership. Amidst recessions and riots, Madagascar reached an agreement with the IMF and World Bank to restructure its economy and reduce the government's debt. Madagascar began to accept it would need to find its place in the global economy, with even many of the smaller socialist parties in the country supporting liberalization efforts. It took a while, but opening up the economy eventually worked, with economic growth outpacing population growth for the first time in 1988. Ratsiraka was able to hold on to his power throughout the 80s, mainly due to a lack of real opposition, though communist parties did lose mayorships in many cities. By the end of the decade, however, opposition parties began demanding an opening of the political sphere. The Christian FFKM offered to work as a mediator, setting up a national conference attempting to represent as many parties and national organizations as possible. The government, however, refused to participate. Albert Zafy, a fellow former cabinet member with Ratsiraka at one time, was chosen to represent this new opposition movement. In 1991, the opposition organized a general strike aimed at forcing Ratsiraka to hold elections and form a transitional government. This was sort of successful. Ratsiraka did agree to form a new government, but didn't give up his power yet. The opposition began to forcibly take over government ministries in response, essentially making their own shadow government. Madagascar now had 2 governments, only one of which was internationally recognized. But by 1992, the internal pressure had become too strong, and Ratsiraka was forced to step down and accept a transitional government and a new constitution. The FFKM, and churches as a whole, would play a major role in building Madagascar's Third Republic, as churches were one of the very few organizations that had survived Ratsiraka's rule. The new constitution greatly limited the role of the president, as well as restricting the office to serving 2 5-year terms maximum. Albert Zafy would win the presidential election of 1993, but by 1995, he was nearly kicked out of office due to many high-profile corruption scandals surrounding him. Seeing the political strife in Madagascar, Ratsiraka returned from his de facto exile in Paris to run against Zafy in the 1997 election. Ratsiraka won narrowly, now preaching about liberalism and reform rather than socialism. Ratsiraka completed this term, making sure to get plenty of his own allies in key government offices, and also changed the constitution so the president could no longer be impeached. His re-election in 2001 would be challenged by the mayor of Antananarivo, Marc Ravalomanana. The mayor ran a modern, well-funded campaign that was able to find broad support nationally. Ravalomanana won by a large margin, but the Constitutional Court claimed another round of voting was necessary, leading to many accusations of fraud. His supporters organized roadblocks and strikes, and he was eventually recognized as the winner internationally in July 2002, forcing Ratsiraka to step down. Under Ravalomanana's leadership, the country's mining sector began to develop properly, with exports of nickel, oil, and gemstones causing small booms in a few regions. He successfully found new international investors, particularly the United States, willing to work with his new government. His time in office was also marked with a sharp increase in inflation and slower economic growth overall when compared to population growth. He won re-election in 2006, though discontent over large foreign land purchases and restrictions on free press led to protests and eventually a military coup in 2009. The coup was organized by the new mayor of Antananarivo, Andry Rajoelina, who set up a transitional government. I have lost track of how many of those we're on now. He initially employed populist measures, such as canceling unpopular foreign trade agreements and implementing anti-corruption initiatives. However, his leadership ended in late 2025 following a military coup and extensive public protests. His popularity, which he had briefly enjoyed, was eroded by the government's failure to improve the economy, a famine in rural areas, and electricity and water shortages in cities. Furthermore, it was revealed that he held dual French citizenship, a violation of Madagascar's nationality law which prohibits multiple citizenships. After his departure from the country in October 2025, the military government revoked his Malagasy citizenship. Madagascar's post-independence history has been a revolving door of semi-popular figures coming in and out of power, with the country rarely being better off because of them. No particular force, ideology, or movement besides maybe the military has been able to consistently move things in any direction. Madagascar's economic growth today seldom outpaces its population growth, sadly, and any major improvements seem remote. The specifics of what's next for the country is hard to say, but from what can be learned from its past, I'm not sure if I have high hopes.
Le numéro que vous avez composé n'existe pas. Merci de vérifier le numéro de votre correspondant et de le composer à nouveau.